Welcome back to part 3 of the further adventures of Zorro as he rides again by Johnston McCulley. There was no dawn in the dark, evil-odored storeroom, but Senor Zorro, by peering through the crack and into the little cabin, could tell of the approach of day. The interior grew gray and then brighter, and finally a ray of sun penetrated. Senor Zorro put his lips close to the tiny opening in the wall and whispered his call. "Senorita." Her swoon had changed to a deep, unnatural slumber by now, and she came from the midst of it at his sibilant call, bewildered for a moment. "See?" she asked. "You were silent for a time. I was afraid." "Senor Zorro, afraid?" she mocked. "Afraid and not ashamed of it where you are concerned, senorita," he replied. "Curl up and try to get some natural sleep. It is in my mind that these pirates will be busy beating out to sea or trying to reach their land and will have no time to bother you." "And what do you intend on doing?" she asked. "Do you intend to sleep also?" "Don Diego Vega might feel called upon to sleep now and then," he answered, "but Senor Zorro dare not. Worry not your pretty head about me, senorita. Rest your pretty eyes, and by the time you awake, fate, perhaps, will have been kind and revealed to us a way out of this present difficulty." She heard him scrambling among his boxes and bales and barrels. She would have spoken to him again, but did not dare raise her voice above a whisper, and she felt slumber claiming her. She was thoroughly exhausted. Before she went to sleep, however, she extinguished the torch and stood for a moment before the open portal, looking through the morning haze at the distant land. The ship was riding easily on the long swell, sailing swiftly toward the south. The senorita slept, and in the dark storeroom Senor Zorro reclined on a pile of sacks and tried to think things out. In an emergency he was quick to think and how to act, to take advantage of every opening, but to sit still and analyze the situation was beyond him. He was a man of action, and it was action he craved. He did not doubt that Don Adre Ruiz and the others had obtained possession of the trading schooner and would follow. But would they follow the correct lane of sea, and they caught up with the pirates, what would they follow? The caballeros would be greatly outnumbered. Not that such a thing would cause them to hesitate about an attack, but it would work against them, of course. For an hour more Senor Zorro thought on the problem, itching to be in the action and knowing that he should remain quiet. The pirates would be searching the ship, he supposed, since he had marked Sanchez the way he had. He would have to remain in hiding, bury himself in the storeroom in such a manner that they could not find him. Then, after a time, he heard a noise in the little cabin and quickly made his way to the crack in the wall. He could see that the door had been opened, and then he saw that Sanchez was standing just inside of it. "Senorita," the pirate lieutenant called, "sleep not when the chief commands." Senorita Lolita came from her slumber and sat up on the bunk with a little cry. "Do not be afraid," Sanchez told her. "By my naked blade I will keep my distance. I have no wish for a knife between my ribs, driven there by a high-born damsel who thinks nothing of murder." "What is your wish?" she demanded. She was herself again now, scorning him, her chin tilted. "It is no wish of mine," Sanchez protested, "but I carry the commands of the chief. He orders that you come on deck, and at once." "I prefer to remain here, Senor Pirate," she replied. "No doubt, but the commands of Barbados are made to be obeyed, and as I learned some years ago. He has said that you are to go on deck, and so you shall, even if I have to carry you." One step he took toward her, but she sprang from the bunk and crouched against the wall. "Dare not to touch me, foul beast," she cried. "'Twas you cut my father down. 'Twas you stole me away from my home and fetched me to the coast." "I do not want to touch you, little spitfire," Sanchez informed her. I have but come to escort you on deck. But Barbados wants with you, I don't know. Perhaps it is to have you get some fresh air so you look pretty when you get delivered to the great man. Ha! You're pretty enough now to suit any man who is not too exacting. He turned back toward the door, offering her no affront, and there he waited as though with deep respect. "Are you coming?" he demanded. "Barbados is not a man to be kept waiting." Once more she curled her lip in scorn. Once more her chin was tilted, and she went forward, drawing aside her skirts, and swept past him like a queen leaving an audience chamber. Sanchez grinned and followed her. Senor Zorro, through the tiny crack, had witnessed this scene. He did not believe that Barbados merely wanted her to take in the air. He felt sudden fear for her, and once more his eyes narrowed and seemed to send forth flakes of steel. He scrambled over the boxes and bales towards the little door. Up the rickety ladder he went, and to the hatch, and there he listened for a time, hearing nothing alarming, and he raised the hatch slowly, an inch at a time, blinking his eyes rapidly at the bright light of day. None of the pirates was in sight. Senor Zorro slipped out and dropped the hatch covering, whipped out his blade, and crept through the little passage toward the spot from where the deck of the ship could be viewed. He was in time to see the senorita piloted across the deck to where Barbados was standing alone. The crew were forward, some sleeping, sprawled out on the deck, others leaning against the rail, watching the antics of the flying fish. Barbados whirled and stood with his arms akimbo, regarding her narrowly. She faced him bravely, her hands clasped behind her back. "Senorita," the pirate said, "queer things happening during the night. I would question you concerning them." "Is it necessary?" she asked. "By my naked blade, it is," he roared. "I am not to be treated like a dog by you or any of your ilk. This is my ship, and where I am sole master, and it would be well for you to remember it." "I'm quite sure none other would desire the mastery of her," the senorita replied. "You have a biting tongue," Barbados said. "I would hate to be your husband. Else that tongue were tamed by love, it would be a hot dish to have continually." She turned away from him and gazed across the sea. He took a step nearer to her. "Is this Senor Zorro aboard?" he demanded suddenly. "Would I know it, were he?" she countered. "Possibly. I'm asking a question and desire an answer," Barbados said. "It has been said that a high-born wench such as yourself scorns to utter falsehood. Let us see if that is correct." She made no reply, and the face of Barbados grew purple with wrath. He closed and unclosed his great hands as though he would have liked to strangle her. "Is Senor Zorro aboard?" he demanded again. "Have you seen him?" She wanted to know. "I have not, but I have seen some things that I imagine are his doing. And I notice that you and your lieutenant bear his mark," she said. "Ha, let me but get my hands on him, and he'll bear more than a mark," Barbados declared. "I'm having a search made of the ship. If he is found, you'll see how a man can be sent to his death speedily." The senorita gave a little cry and recoiled, her hands at her breast. "Ha, you show fear for him," Barbados cried. "So he is aboard, is he?" "Have I said so?" she asked. "You have not, but now you're going to tell me the truth, wench. I'm done with trifling. You presume too much on the knowledge that you are to be the prize of an important man. Do you not know you are in my power? Could I not do with you as I pleased, and then leave you overboard, and tell this important gentleman later that you got the chance and threw yourself into the sea?" Evil glistened suddenly in his eyes, and the little senorita recoiled again. Sanchez, who had remained standing near, laughed like a fiend. "We could gamble for her," Sanchez suggested. "This is my affair, and you will do well to remain silent," Barbados declared, whirling upon him. Once more he faced Senorita Lolita, and a fiendish look upon his face made her flinch. "Tell me all you know about the Senor Zorro," Barbados commanded. "Did you slay the man in your cabin, or did Senor Zorro do it? Answer me, wench, Reply here and now, else I teach you a lesson you'll remember to your last hour." He sprang forward suddenly and grasped her arm cruelly, and she cried out because of the indignity and the pain. Senor Zorro, from his place of watching, flinched as though he had experienced indignity and pain himself. He wanted to hurl himself forward into the attack, but he realized that it would not last for long. He could not hope to engage the entire ship's company, though he made a long and running fight of it and emerged from combat the victor. But there came an interruption. From forward was a hail. "A sail! A sail!" The pirates sprang to their feet. Those who had been sprawled upon the deck asleep awoke. Barbados forgot the senorita for a moment and turned to take a look. Behind, bearing down upon them swiftly, came another ship. Senor Zorro knew, as did the pirates, that she had put out from the land before the dawn and far to the south of where the pirate ship had been at anchor. Hope beat suddenly in Zorro's breast. She was a trading schooner. He could tell that even at a distance. If only she carried Andre Ruiz and his friends. It was a question, what would happen? If she was some honest vessel, perhaps she would fall victim to the pirate craft. She might not be prepared for a fight. Barbados issued a volley of commands. The pirate craft turned for a run further out to sea so that she could look back and catch on the oncoming ship between her and the shore. Lookouts were posted to watch carefully. Sanchez ran here and there, echoing the orders of his chief. From his hiding place, Senor Zorro watched now the approaching vessel, and now the deck where Senorita Lolita was standing against the mast, forgotten for a moment. Were he quite sure the ship carried his friend, Senor Zorro could go into action, for he flattered himself that he would be able to hold his own till the other ship came up. It appeared the other vessel had no intention of running up the coast. She changed her course also and bore after the pirate craft. Senor Zorro watched her carefully. He could not make out her flag at the distance, but he could see nothing except that she was a type of trading schooner and that she had swift heels, for she was gaining rapidly, as though sailed by experts, and the pirate craft was foul bottom, needing careening and scraping. Barbados had hurried to the rail and was watching the oncoming ship. Senorita Lolita saw it also, but did not seem to realize that it meant hope. Perhaps she feared that the ship was but coming into grave danger, running into a conflict that would mean capture and death for her crew. Senor Zorro glanced at the deck and then back at the approaching vessel again. He saw that another sail was being sent aloft. It was broken out, snapped into place. The lines tightened, and Senor Zorro with difficulty restrained a cheer. On the white expanse of the sail, painted in haphazard fashion but easily made out, was a monster Z. So his friends were on that ship. Senor Zorro felt better now. He glanced once more toward the deck and realized that Barbados had seen what was on the sail also, for the pirate chief left the rail and stamped back to the senorita's side, determination in his manner and rage in his countenance. "Now you'll speak the truth, wench," he shouted. "Is Senor Zorro aboard this ship? If those are his friends coming up, then we'll attend to him before we attend to them." "I do not care to have a conversation with you," she said. "No, but by my naked blade I'm in command here," he roared. "An answer I intend to have." He lurched forward and grasped her by the shoulders, shook her as a terrier shakes a rat, held her arms at arm's length, and shook her again. She fought against crying out, but could not win the battle against such cruel odds. One plaintively little cry drifted across the deck and straight into the heart of Senor Zorro. He transferred his sword from his right hand to his left and whipped the dagger from his belt and hurled it. His aim was poor, yet it come close enough. The dagger was driven quivering into the mass between Barbados and the senorita. Barbados, with a cry, sprang backward, and the senorita slumped to the deck at the foot of the mast, and Senor Zorro realized in that instant that he had stepped forward too far and had been seen. Sanchez gave a cry and started toward him. The pirates whirled from the rail to look. Barbados saw him. 'Tis Senor Zorros, Barbados shrieked. After him! Fetch him to me alive! An extra share of loot to the man who gets him. It was the promise of loot that drove them on. They shrieked and rushed forward. Senor Zorro put the blade of his sword between his teeth and darted up into the rigging. And then began the fight, the like of which the pirates had never seen before. Senor Zorro seemed scarcely human. Up the rigging he went like a monkey. He sprang from spar to spar. Down the ratlines he rushed. Down the ropes he slid. Now and then he clashed one of the pirates, and always the sword of Zorro darted in and out and wounded the man and left him behind. Seize him, Barbados shrieked. After him, dogs. Is one man to hold you off forever? Do not slay him. An extra share of loot. Senor Zorro struck the deck and darted across it. Sanchez retreated before his darting blade. He pierced the breast of a pirate who stepped before him, hurled another aside, sprang to the mast, and recovered his dagger. He stooped for an instant and pressed the lips of the senorita to his own, and then dashed on. Now he was concerned, and now he fought his way to freedom. A dagger whirled past his head and buried itself in the deck beyond. Into the rigging he went again, up the ratlines, out along the spar. They followed him and put his sword into his scabbard and sprang. Far below he caught another spar, ran to the mast, and started downward again. One glance he gave at the approaching ship. His friends were gaining, but they were still far away. Again they had him cornered, and again he escaped them by jumping to the deck below. He dashed around the deck cabin, met and defeated another man with a single clash of blades, and was at the rail. There was grave danger on deck, he knew, and so he went aloft once more. Up and up he went, while Barbados and Sanchez shrieked to the others to follow and get him. Alive, I want him alive, Barbados shrieked. Another spring from spar to spar. Senor Zorro almost missed because of rolling of the ship, but he caught and clung on and scrambled to a place of safety. In toward the mast he hurried. But there was a treacherous spot on the spar where the mist had struck and clung, a wet spot made to cause the boot to slip. Senor Zorro felt himself reeling suddenly to one side. He grasped wildly, grasped nothing but empty air. His heart seemed to stop beating for an instant. He felt himself falling through space. To his ears came the terrified cry of the senorita. The deck rushed up to meet him. He struck it with a crash, and darkness came. Senorita Lolita gave out another little cry, covered her face with her hands. Barbados and Sanchez rushed forward, the others at their heels. Senor Zorro was unconscious for the moment, though the fall had broken no bones. Bind him, Barbados cried, glancing back at the oncoming ship. We attend to him first, and then to his friends. Water his head well and bring him back to life. Get ready a plank. The pirates rushed to do his bidding. Senor Zorro's wrists were lashed behind his back. One man hurled water into his face, and he groaned and opened his eyes and tried to sit up on deck. Ha! Barbados cried. So, it's Senor Zorro, eh? And now we can repay you for this little mark you put on my forehead, senor. Barbados also knows how to make payment. He gave a signal, and the pirates forced Zorro to his feet. He tried to fight, but they overpowered him. They braced him against the mast while Senorita crept aside and watched. Hold the wench, Barbados commanded of two men. We don't want her throwing herself overboard, and I wish her to witness what is to come. The two men held her. Senor Zorro, half throttled, was kept against the mast. Barbados made another sign, and some of the men carried forward a heavy bar of iron and lashed it to Senor Zorro's wrist. To the rail with him, Barbados commanded. They forced him to the rail, and two men urged the senorita along beside him. Over the rail, a long, wide plank had been extended. Senor Zorro knew what they meant to do to him, and now Senorita Lolita realized it too. No, no, she shrieked. You must not do this thing. Ha! Revenge is sweet, Barbados cried. Senor Zorro, you're about to descend to the watery hell. We'll let you take your sword with you, since you may need it fighting demons. You take the plunge, and then, when yon ship comes up, we attend to your friends. As for the senorita, now that she will be delivered safely to one has bargained for her. Why not give me a chance in a fair fight? Zorro asked. Any two of you, any three. Your friends are coming up, and we must prepare for them, Barbados replied, laughing. You have fought your last fight on earth, senor. See if you can mark the brow of the devil with your cursed Z. Diego, the senorita moaned. As a special favor, you may kiss the wench, Barbados said. It will be practice. Yes, you have fought your last fight on earth, senor. See if you can mark the brow of the devil with your cursed Z. Diego, the senorita moaned. As a special favor, you may kiss the wench, Barbados said. It will be practice for her. And take with you to the bottom of the sea the knowledge that another will kiss her soon. The senorita rushed forward and threw her arms around him and kissed him unashamed. Diego, I'll follow you, she said. 'Tis a merry end, Senor Zorro declared. Be brave of heart. Our friends are at hand, senorita. If Don Andre Ruiz is aboard that ship, he will know how to save you and how to avenge me. Again they kissed, and the two parties were jerked roughly backward. Barbados laughed like a fiend. Practice for another man, he roared. When Captain Ramon... So it is, Ramon, Zorro cried. See, and a lot of good the knowledge will do to you now. This much good, that I shall not die, Zorro answered. If you do not, then indeed you are a man. With a weight on your lashed wrists. Enough, he exclaimed. Put him on the plank. They lifted him and stood him upon it, facing him toward the sea. They forced him a short distance from the rail. Diego, the senorita cried, agony in her voice. At her cry, the plank was tipped. And with her cry ringing in his ears, Senor Zorro shot downward like a man of metal, shot downward into the tossing sea, and he was gone. Upon the frantic departure of Don Diego Vega from Reina de los Angeles, Don Andre Ruiz took command of the situation in the Caballeros simultaneously. There was none willing to dispute his leadership. Don Andre has always been a leader, and where there was an enterprise that called for hard riding and hard fighting in the bright face of danger. Cab Ramon was not to be found, and Sergeant Gonzalez had ridden away with the soldiers. So Don Andre noised it abroad that he and his friends intended on pursuing the pirates as speedily as possible, and made a quick search for mounts. They acquired enough presently, but the horses were a sorry lot when compared to the Caballeros' own, which the pirates had already stolen. And without changing their attire, retaining their splendid costumes they had been wearing at Don Diego's bachelor feast, and with their jeweled swords at their side, they rode up the slope and took the trail that would carry them to the sea. Don Andre decided against following the pirates' tracks. He knew that they would reach the coast long before the Caballeros and would embark. Don Diego would do what he could, which would be little. And Don Andre realized that their only hope was getting to the trading schooner, put onto it, and make an attempt to overtake Barbados and his evil crew. They rode with what speed they could, shouting at their poor mounts and at one another, along the slopes, down the dusty trails, and so toward the distant sea. They crossed the trail of the pirates who had looted the Pulido hacienda, but ignored it. Don Andre Ruiz knew where the trading schooner would be anchored, some miles to the south of where the pirate ship undoubtedly had touched, and that place was his objective. Hour after hour they rode, urging their jaded horses to their utmost, glad the moon was bright and they could make as good progress as in the day. And when they finally were within a couple miles of the sea, and also an hour of the dawn, Don Andre suddenly raised his hand and reined in his horse, and those behind stopped with him. A native was standing in the middle of the trail. Don Andre approached him slowly, hand on the hilt of his dagger. There were some natives who were not to be trusted, but when he drew near he recognized the fellow as one who had worked at his father's hacienda. "What do you here?" Don Andre demanded. "I saw the senor coming from the distance with his friends," the native answered. "I have news. Speak." "I was coming across the hill, senor, and saw the pirates." Talk quickly, Audrey Ruiz commanded. I went into hiding lest they slay me. They had good horses and much loot, also a girl. Tell us of that. It was the senorita Don Diego Vega expects to wed, the native said. They took her with them to the shore, and presently more pirates came from Reina de los Angeles. They went aboard the ship, taking the senorita and the loot with them. What else? There was a man appeared, senor, and killed one of the pirates. I got a glimpse of him, Don Audrey, and it was Senor Zorro, the one that... Ha! Zorro, Audrey shrieked. Speak quickly. He ran from them and gave up the pursuit, but when the boats started from the land, he dove into the sea and swam after them, and he did not return. Then he's aboard the pirate craft, Don Audrey declared. The pirate ship sailed to the south, senor. Good, Audrey cried. Know you anything of the trading schooner? Si, senor. She is anchored straight ahead, and the men expect to start for Reina de los Angeles in the morning to trade. They will not, though they do not know it, Don Audrey said. Here's gold for you, fellow. Ha, so the pirate ship sailed south. That means that the rogues are going to their hidden rendezvous somewhere down the coast. We'll get the trading schooner and pursue. Forward. But as they would have started, Don Audrey Ruiz raised his hand and stopped them again. From the rear came the beating of horse hooves. Don Audrey motioned to the caballeros, and they scattered to either side of the road and prepared to receive the newcomer. Nearer grew the beating hooves, and a horseman appeared, riding frantically through the moonlight down the slope toward them. When he saw them, he reined up and stopped in the midst in a shower of gravel, sand, and dust. The reckless rider was Sergeant Gonzalez. Ha, senors, he called. I have overtaken you finally, it appears. And to what end? Don Audrey Ruiz asked, urging his horse forward and glaring at the soldier. You have news? Not so, senor. I come in search of it. I returned to Reina de los Angeles with my troopers to learn that pirates and what they had done. I learned also of your departure, so left my men and rode to you. Captain Ramon was not at the Presidio. As the next soldier of rank, it is in our minds to get to the trading schooner and give pursuit, Ruiz told him. That is a worthy idea, Gonzalez declared. Too long have those bloody pirates infested our shores, meal, mush, and goat's milk. Let us go forward. Are you seeking to take command of this expedition? Don Audrey Ruiz demanded hotly. This is a private rescue party of caballeros. I would have you know that we're not a detachment of the governor's men. We have small love for the governor. Though I wear this uniform, I say the same thing, Sergeant Gonzalez declared. But I am after pirates. I care not who commands, so that I get a chance at a pirate with my trusty blade. Ha! When I meet a pirate face to face. Spare us your boasting, Don Audrey said. Boasting, shrieked the sergeant. Boasting? Perchance you would like to cross blades with me and answer that insult? You are safe in making the challenge, knowing that I would not stop to do so, Don Audrey said. And you are safe in refusing, having the ability to hide behind your gentle blood, the sergeant returned. Senor, Sergeant Gonzalez urged his mount closer to that of Don Audrey, but the expression in the sergeant's face had changed peculiarly, and his countenance did not show rage. Senor, it is true, Sergeant Gonzalez observed, that I am but a poor soldier without blue blood in my veins. My father was a butcher, and my mother's father raised swine, but Don Diego Vega has been good enough to term himself my friend, and now that he is in peril, I ride with his other friends to his rescue, and the rescue of his lady. I trust the senor will not misunderstand. I do not seek to equal my betters. If I am not good enough to ride with you, caballero, then I ride by myself, but I ride. Don Audrey Ruiz bent forward and searched the sergeant's face by the light of one torch the company had burning. Then he extended his hand. Sergeant Gonzalez, it is for me to ask for your pardon, Don Audrey said grandly. I would not be worthy the blood in my veins did I do less. Any friend of Don Diego Vega is welcome on this expedition. But have you leave of absence? Ha, I took it, Sergeant Gonzalez roared, grinning broadly. Captain Ramon was not at the Presidio. Being the next in rank, I ordered myself to set out on the trail and get a full report of the occurrence. when I am able to make the report when I return. Ride you with us, Don Andre said. Thus we have the sanction of soldiery and official approval of our deeds. I shall approve anything that has to do with causing the death of pirates, Sergeant Gonzalez declared. The moon disappeared entirely and the night was dark. They rode forward slowly now, carefully not to get off the trail. But they did not have much farther to go. Soon they came to the crest of a hill, and below them they heard the hissing sea and saw the lights of a ship riding at anchor a short distance from the shore. Down to the surf they urged their mounts, and they were met with another surprise, for a horseman was awaiting them there in the darkness. Don Andre Ruiz gasped in astonishment when he recognized old Fray Felipe. "We left you in town, Fray," he said. "And how is it we find you here? In this some sort of miracle?" "I departed the town while you were yet searching for horses," Fray Felipe explained. "I got a mount for myself and came ahead, because I cannot ride like the wind, as do you young caballeros. It was in my mind that you would make for the trading schooner. I heard you say as much." "But why have you come?" Don Andre wanted to know. "I have known Don Diego Vega and the little señorita since they were babies in arms, and I was to have married them today," the old Fray replied. "But fighting is not your forte," Don Andre declared. "You are old, and you wear a gown. Do you remain behind to pray for our success, and let us wield our blades? That were better, Fray." "I am willing to make my prayers, but I have taken a vow," Fray Felipe replied. "I must return the golden goblet the pirates stole from the church." "Then you go with us?" Don Andre asked. "Si. I've already communicated with the captain of the trading schooner, senor. He is coming ashore now in one of his boats. Thus time will be saved." The caballeros dismounted swiftly and gathered near the waterline. In from the distant trading schooner a boat was coming, driven over the choppy water by silent oarsmen. Half a dozen men were in her, and their flaring torches touched the sea with streaks of flame. They approached the shore carefully and on guard, as though fearing some trap set by thieves, and by the light of the torches those on the land could see the men in the boat were heavily armed. Don Andre Ruiz and Fray Felipe went forward and met the boat at the water's edge and greeted the schooner's captain as he stepped on land. He was a regular trader who carried goods overland from the sea to Reina de los Angeles every now and again. He traveled as far as San Diego de Alcala, the south, but as far as San Francisco de Asís to the north. Bold fellow and honest, well and favorably known. "What is all this tumult?" the captain demanded. "Fray Felipe, are you not?" "Ha! I thought that I recognized you, good Fray. And Don Andre Ruiz, whose father has purchased much goods for me." "Sundry caballeros and men of rank also. In what way may I be of service to you, senors?" "Have you ridden out all this way and long into the night to have first choice of my stock of goods?" Don Andre Ruiz told him swiftly. "We want your ship to pursue a pirate craft," he said. "How is this, senor?" the captain cried. "There are pirates in these waters?" "Si, and possibly within half a dozen miles of you," Don Andre told him. "Early in the night they raided Reina de los Angeles. They also raided Pulido Hacienda and carried away the señorita, who was to have wed Don Diego Vega this day." "By the saints," the schooner's captain swore, "they stole the bride to be of Señor Zorro? Is he here with you?" "He followed them, going ahead of us, and possibly managed to get aboard their ship," Don Andre explained. "The pirate craft has sailed by this time. They went toward the south. They will be beat out to sea for a distance. If we can start soon, it may be possible to overtake them." "How many rascals in this pirate crew?" the captain of the schooner asked. "Not more than 30, as nearly as we can judge," Don Andre replied, "and here are a score of caballeros, and we're ready to fight." The captain of the schooner drew a deep breath, held it for an instant, and then expelled it with great force, and during this process he evidently made up his mind concerning the matter. "Señores, I'm yours to command," he said. "My ship is yours, and her crew. If I can do anything to help rid the seas of such vermin, I'm more than willing." My schooner is a swift vessel in light winds, such as we find now. I'll signal the other boats and have you aboard as soon as possible. You will not fail to profit of it, Don Audrey told him. I'm not doing it with the expectation of profit, the captain declared. I detest thieves, and I admire honest men. I have many friends in Reina de los Angeles, some of whom probably have suffered at the hands of these pirates, and above all I admire the exploits of Senor Zorro, as Don Diego was called. It will be a pleasure, senores, to aid you in this. He called to his men, and they signaled to the ship with their torches. Out of the darkness and across the tumbling sea came more boats from the schooner. The caballeros turned their horses adrift, knowing that they would be picked up and returned, made certain that they had daggers and swords handy, and got quickly into the boats and put out to the ship. Sergeant Gonzalez and Fray Felipe, by accident, were placed in the same craft, sitting side by side on one of the wide thwarts. Sergeant Gonzalez observed the Fray carefully from the corners of his eyes. The sergeant wished to talk, having kept silent for some minutes, and the Fray was the nearest man he knew. Never did I think to join hands with you in this enterprise, Fray, the sergeant said, puffing out his cheeks. If I'm not badly mistaken, you are the gowned one who stopped me in the plaza on a certain occasion and made the remarks about soldiers drinking too much wine at the posada. But pirates' raids cause rescue parties, and rescue parties cause strange comrades. I'm appreciating that fact, Fray Felipe replied quietly with a smile. So they stole your sacred goblet, did they? Sergeant Gonzalez said smoothly. Fray, when I rescued the senorita, aided Don Diego to escape, and annihilated the pirates with my blade, then will I regain your goblet for you. Steal church goblets and brides, eh? Ha! Meal mush and goat's milk. If your sword arm is half as strong as your tongue, senor, Fray Felipe rebuked him gently, then the pirates are as good as dead already. Sergeant Gonzalez whirled upon him. Ha! Stinging words from a gentle Fray, he gasped. It is possible for me to get insulted where and when I can wipe out the insult with a thrust. A caballero insults me and then refuses to fight because of noble blood in his veins and the poor swill in mine. A Fray insults me and I cannot fight a man who wears a gown. Meal mush and goat's milk. But wait until we meet up with these pirates. Let a pirate but insult me, and my blade shall be bathed in blood. Sergeant Gonzalez turned away abruptly to nurse his wrath, and Fray Felipe smiled and his eyes twinkled. He waited a moment and then touched the sergeant on the shoulder. Soldiers and frailes alike are needed in the world, Fray Felipe said. There are times when a hardy soldier should be gentle, and even there are times when a Fray should fight. Let us be friends. Fray, Sergeant Gonzalez declared, you're a noble fellow after all. I forgive you for what you said about drinking wine. When the musk commences, Fray, get you behind me. My sword shall be a shield for you, Fray. I thank you, Fray Felipe said, and I shall shield you in turn with my prayers. Prayers have power, Sergeant Gonzalez told him, but when it comes to fighting, pirates give me my trusty blade. Fray, a pirate has not the sense to know when a prayer is directed against him. Soon they came alongside the schooner and mounted to the deck by the lighted torches. The boats were swung aboard, and the captain and Don Audrey Ruiz had a long conference. Then there came a volley of orders. The anchor came up, the sails filled, and the schooner crept off the shore and away from the land through the black night. Straight out to sea they went, gathering headway. In time a faint streak of light showed across the land, and down came. Caballeros and crew strained their eyes and swept the seas in every direction, and finally the sharp eyes of one of the men aloft discovered a sail. The course of the trading schooner was changed, and the chase began. Nearer their quarry they crept as the sun came up and bathed the sea and the land glistening through the haze. Glasses were leveled up at the distant craft. She is the pirate, the schooner captains declared. Her flag, iniquity, flies from her mast. He bellowed another volley of orders to his crew, and they crowded on all the sail. They rushed about the schooner, preparing her for battle. The eagle caballeros looked to their blades, the crew to their cutlasses. If Zorro is aboard that craft, he should know that his friends are near at the hand of the rescue, Don Audrey said. And then it was that they got out a sail and painted a gigantic Z upon it and sent it aloft. It was their banner of battle, a flag of war that beckoned their allegiance to the man and the cause. Courage and swift work does it, the schooner captain told Don Audrey. We're greatly outnumbered, but my crew has had dealings with pirates before. Hence, each man will fight with the strength of 5. And you and your friends, Don Audrey, have good reason for fighting like fiends. We are prepared to do it, Don Audrey replied. Think you that we can overhaul that pirate? It is but a question of time, the captain declared. The pirate sails prettily, but her bottom is foul. I can tell you that much at a distance. Pirates are too lazy to keep their ship in perfect shape, and this little schooner of mine is swift craft and in prime condition. They gained steadily. Meanwhile, they watched the distant pirate ship continually. They saw that there was some sort of tumult on board. Don Audrey Ruiz, standing at the rail near the bow with a glass glued to his eyes, watched carefully. It is probably that Senor Zorro is fighting the entire pirate company, he announced. I can see men running around the rigging. Let us pray that he might be on time. Sergeant Gonzalez, standing near him, uttered an oath that the presence of Fray Felipe did not keep back. Meal mush and goat's milk, he exclaimed. Let us crowd on more sail and have at these pirates. He swept his blade from its scabbard. That for a pirate, he shrieked, thrusting about him in rage. This for a pirate, ha! Save your breath and your strength, Don Audrey advised him. You may have need of both of them soon. Did you hear that, Fray? Sergeant Gonzalez demanded, whirling upon old Felipe. More insults, and I cannot avenge them. A caballero insults me and will not fight, and I cannot fight a fray. By the time we clash with these pirates, I shall be in a fine rage and work it off on their worthless bodies. Don Audrey Ruiz gave a gasp and called some of the caballeros to his side. Look, he directed, they're making some poor devil walk the plank. By saints, it's Zorro. Zorro, the others cried. Look, and the little senorita is standing at the rail, forced to watch. There was a moment of horrified silence. The face of Don Audrey Ruiz was white as contemplated the fate of his friend. Caballero said not a word, but those who had glasses watched, and the others strained their eyes in effort to see. And then Don Audrey Ruiz gave a low cry of horror and turned quickly away as though he could endure the sight no longer. What he had seen had been enough. There were traces of tears in his eyes, and his voice choked. He's gone, Don Audrey said. Don Diego, my friend. We can only avenge him now. Gone, Sergeant Gonzalez cried, sudden tears in his eyes, too. He brushed them away roughly and blinked. Don Diego, gone. Then, by the saints, will my blade be thrust as never been thrust before. Now, by the saints. His vow ended in a choke of emotion. He turned away quickly. Don Audrey, his eyes stinging, his lips set thin in a straight line, turned to Fray Felipe. Say your prayers for him, he directed, and pray also that we will know how to avenge him when we come alongside. Dios, give strength to my arm. Smiling in the face of death, Senor Zorro yet battled to keep from showing his genuine emotions because of the presence of the senorita. But in that awful moment, when he stood upon the plank, looking first at the evil faces of Barbados and Sanchez, and then at the agonized countenance of Senorita Lolita Pulido, he knew what torture meant. It was not that Senor Zorro was afraid of death itself, a thing that must come to every human being in the end, but his agony came from the knowledge of he would leave behind when he took this plunge into the sea. The woman he had hoped to make his bride, his friends, his father, his estate, he was leaving them all for the great unknown. And he was young and had not lived his full of life yet, but besides, he was leaving the senorita in grave danger. He could only hope that his friends in the vessel behind would be able to be of service to her, and that would they know how to avenge him. Barbados gave his last mocking laugh, and Senor Zorro felt the plank tipping. He felt himself losing his balance. The heavy weight on his wrist was almost bending him backward. He knew how swiftly it would carry him down into the depths. Then he would come brief, useless struggle, he supposed, a moment of horror in the end. His eyes met those of the senorita yet again, and then it seemed that everything gave way beneath him, and he shot downward. There came a splash of water. He struck the surface. He felt the sudden chill, and then the waves closed over his head. He was a famous swimmer, but no man can swim with a heavy bar of metal tied to his wrist, and those wrists were lashed behind his back. Mechanically, Senor Zorro protected himself as he struck the water, as though for a deep dive. He drew air into his lungs until it seemed they would burst. He kicked in vain against the down-pulling power of the heavy weight. Down and down he went into the depths until the light of the surface faded and found himself in darkness. Senor Zorro prayed and worked at the same instant. He jerked his wrists from side to side behind his back, trying to force them apart. He expelled a tiny bit of air now and then as he descended, but retained as much as possible. Often he played at the remaining as long as possible beneath the water, but it was one thing to do so when a man has knowledge that he can spring to the surface at any time, and quite another when he has reason to believe that he'll never reach the surface again. Yet he continued to struggle as he shot downward. Red flashes were before his eyes now, and a multitude of faces and senses seemed to flit before him. In that awful instant he relived half his life. Dios, he thought, if this be death. Another tug he gave at his wrist. The man who had lashed the heavy weight had not done his work well. Perhaps he was too busy watching Barbados and fearing him. Perhaps he had held a sneaking admiration for the Senor Zorro, who had offered battle to the entire ship's company. However, the rope that held the weight gave a trifle. Senor Zorro, in his agony, realized that. He tugged again and then pressed his palms close together and drew in his wrists as much as possible. The heavy weight dragging downward pulled loose loop over the wrists and hands. Zorro felt an immediate relief. He realized what had happened, and then he began his battle to reach the surface. The weight was gone, but the wrists were still lashed together behind his back. He kicked and struggled and shot upward. He expelled more of that precious air in his lungs that he retained. His chest was burning. His ears were ringing. He was almost unconscious because of the pressure of the water he had been forced to endure. He saw a glimmer of light, but he knew that the surface was yet far away, and it occurred to him that even the surface did not mean life, for his wrists were yet behind him and he was miles from shore. On he went, up and up, struggling and fighting. He jerked at his wrists until they were raw and bleeding, but to no avail. There were those who had lashed his wrists done better than the one who had fastened the weight to him. And finally he gave a last struggle, a last kick, and felt the blessed air striking upon his face. He fought to get into proper position for resting as he could. He kept afloat and drew in great gasps of air, and finally reduced his breathing to normal. And then he rose on the crest of a wave and looked around as well as he could. The pirate ship was some distance away, sailing slowly before a gentle breeze. Senor Zorro found himself floating in her wake, but he could see men rushing around her deck and up into her rigging, but at a distance could not guess their tasks. The wave dropped him and lifted him again, spinning him halfway around. Senor Zorro grasped at the risk of swallowing a portion of salt water. Bearing down upon him was another craft, the other one with the gigantic Z up on the sail. Zorro saw that he was directly in her path. Not much hope burned in his breast, yet the spirit of combat still lived. He would not give up as long as there was the slightest chance. He would fight until exhausted. He sank for the last time toward the bottom of the sea. Those on the approaching ship did not see him, for they were watching the pirate craft preparing for battle that was to come. He hailed those on board, but his voice was drowned by the roar of water against the schooner's bows. He saw that he would strike him, and kicked frantically to work himself to one side of the track he was following. Another glance ahead at the pirate craft convinced him that schooner would not change her course. Once more he tugged at his bonds to no avail. He felt himself drawn in toward the schooner's bows and fought against the pull of the water helplessly. He was picked up and hurled forward and whirled around. Had he saved himself from the depths, he wondered, to be crushed senseless by the bow of the craft that carried his friends? Then she was upon him. He rose to the crest of a wave and was hurled at the bow. He saw an anchor chain that was loosely looped in dragging line, so if he could but latch onto one of those, he could make his way onto the deck. There might be a chance. Once more the sea whirled and cast him forward. He came against the swinging loop of the anchor chain and crash, grasped it, lifted and dropped, but held on. For a moment he rested, panting, realizing how precarious his position. He threw one leg around the swinging chain, and how to reach that bowsprit he could not fathom. Those above would pay no attention to him and could not hear him if he hailed. And to climb that swinging loop of chain would be a task for an athlete with hands unbound. The bow of the ship dipped, and Senor Zorro felt himself soused in the water for an instant. He gripped the chain with his hands and his leg and fought to maintain his position and arms, and they were aching. And the chain had cut through his clothing already and was chafing at his leg. Once more the bow dipped, and Zorro slipped a few feet along the chain, unable to stop his descent. He gripped with his leg again. His hands came to a stop, and he realized that the rope that had bound them had found an obstruction. Zorro worked slowly and carefully with his fingers, even as he held on. With one of the links of the chain he found was imperfect. It cracked and presented a jagged edge. Hope sang in his breast once more, but he knew that he would have to work carefully. He did not dare release his hold entirely, for a sudden dip of the bow and quick wash of the water would be enough to sweep him from the chain. But he sawed back and forth as well as he could, pulling the rope across the rough edge of the chain link. He glanced ahead. The ships were not far apart now, and the schooner swung a bit to starboard, so as to bear down on the pirate craft from a more advantageous angle. Zorro worked frantically, and after a time he felt the rope give. His wrists were raw and pain. His leg was bleeding already. There were pains in his head, and his vision was imperfect, but hope sang with him once more. He sawed, and once more he glanced ahead. It would not be long now before the ships clashed. He wanted to be up on deck, with normal breath in his nostrils and a sword of Zorro in his hand, to aid his friends, to fight his way back on deck of that pirate craft to the senorita's side. The rope gave again. Senor Zorro was forced to rest for a moment, leaning back on the chain. A wave swept him to one side. He thought for an instant he was gone, but he regained his balance and continued sawing. Presently he knew that he was free. A rope dangled from one wrist only. He gave an exclamation of delight and thanks, gripped the chain, and turned over. He regarded his bleeding wrists, hesitated a moment, gathered a breath and courage, and commenced to the perilous ascent of the chain. It was a painful and difficult task. Senor Zorro set his teeth into his lower lip and struggled upward foot by foot. Swinging the chain, slippery from the sea, threatened to pitch him back into the water. Every few feet he was obliged to stop, to gasp for breath, and close his eyes for a moment because the pain in his wrist and leg made him weak with nausea. He came within a short distance of the vessel, slipped back and forth his way upward again. He grasped with one hand the chain port and held on. His hope had increased now. Nothing would make him lose this hold, he told himself. A moment he rested, then he forced his way upward again. The schooner was very close to the pirate ship now. On deck above him, Senor Zorro could hear Don Andre Ruiz shrieking instructions to the caballeros and the captain shouting to his crew. He managed to get up the butt of the bowsprit, and then there, safe from the sea, he rested for a moment. The two ships would crash together in a minute or two, he saw. He raised his head weakly and took a deep breath, and then struggled to his feet, ready to spring down to the deck. His hand went down to the whip, the sword of Zorro from his scabbard. The schooner yawed suddenly, and the helmsman fought to get position of advantage. The big jib swung back, whipped by the angry wind. Senor Zorro was looking down at the deck and did not see this danger. Don Andre Ruiz turned at the instant, shrieked, and rubbed his eyes. "Zorro!" he cried. He was seen from the deck of the pirate craft, too. Barbados and Sanchez caught sight of him. Sanchez crossed himself quickly, and the face of Barbados turned white, and the jib cracked against Senor Zorro's body, knocked him from his precarious perch, and hurled him once more into the sea. The schooner sailed on and came against the pirate ship with a crash. But here was a battle unlike the usual one when honest men met pirates. As a usual thing, the pirates could be expected to board and slay without mercy, to loot, and then either destroy the ill-fated vessel or take it away as a prize. And the honest men could be expected only to offer what defense they could. But here was the case where the honest men were more than willing to carry the fight to the pirates. For Don Andre Ruiz and his caballero friends had seen Senor Zorro walk the plank, and also they fought to rescue a lady. But both forces found themselves disconnected at the outset. Don Andre Ruiz, glancing toward the bow of the schooner, was sure that he saw Senor Zorro standing there against a background of sky and water, his figure dripping. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Senor Zorro was gone. "'Tis the spirit of Zorro that came to aid us," Don Andre cried. "I saw him for a moment, waving his hand at me and reaching for his blade. The spirit of Zorro fights with us." The caballeros were not certain what he meant, but they cheered his words and rushed towards the rail, their gleaming blades ready to be dyed in crimson. Fray Felipe knelt beside the mast in prayer, but Sergeant Gonzalez, standing with his feet wide apart and his sword in hand, stared foolishly toward the bow and gasped his astonishment and fear. "I saw him," the sergeant shrieked. "I saw Don Diego, my friend, by the saints." The ships crashed together, but the pirates did not rush, as was their custom, for fear had clutched at their superstitious nature, even as it had clutched at Barbados and Sanchez, his evil lieutenant. Sanchez had shrieked the news, but Barbados did not heed his intelligence. Barbados himself had seen Senor Zorro standing against the sky, and how may a man do that when he's been sent to the bottom of the sea with a heavy weight fastened to him? "Fiends of hell," Barbados screeched, "this Zorro must be a demon." "We cannot fight ghosts," Sanchez cried. "We are lost before we commence." Barbados seemed to come to himself and shake off his terror in part. He instantly was eager to win free from the trading schooner. He did not fear the caballeros, who were greatly outnumbered now, but he did fear the supernatural. He forgot the chance for murder and loot and wanted only to get away. Barbados shrieked his commands, and the half-stupefied pirates ran to execute them. The pirate craft swung away from the schooner so that the men could not spring from one ship to the other. There were less than half a dozen clashes of blades, less than half a dozen of minor wounds. Slowly the pirate craft fell away. The helmsman of the schooner worked frantically to bring his ship back into the wind. The caballeros and members of the schooner's crew waited, eager for the ships to come together again that they might engage the pirates and fight to victory. Barbados howled more commands. From the pirate ship came a rain of fireballs, and the flaming torches were hurled. It was a favorite pirate trick, and the men knew what their commander wanted. Clouds of pungent smoke rolled across the deck of the schooner. The caballeros gasped and fought to get to the clean, pure air. Their nostrils and throats were raw, their eyes stinging. Through the dense smoke they could see very little. The pirate ship gradually was lengthening the distance between her and the trading schooner. The pirates' work had been done. For the sails of the schooner were wrapped in flames, and bits of them fell burning to the deck below. Flames licked at the tarred rigging and spread out onto the spars. "She's making away," Don Andre Ruiz cried. "She's running from us." There seemed to be no question about it now. The pirates were hurrying away without giving battle, and the raging caballeros wanted battle, and they remembered that the senorita was yet captive on the pirate craft. The captain was howling to his crew, and the men were fighting the raging flames. The caballeros, forgetting their skills and satins and plumes, ran to help. Here was a foe more formidable than the pirates of the open sea. The schooner drifted with the water and the wind in the wake of the pirate ship. The smoke drifted away, and finally the fire was extinguished. Quick inventory was taken of the damage. It didn't amount to very much, since the rigging hadn't been burned to a great extent, but the sails were gone for the greater part, and pursuit for the moment was at an end. Again the captain shouted his commands, and his men hurried to carry them out, and he turned to Don Audrey. "I have other sails, senor," he explained. "They will be in place as rapidly as my men can get them there. The craft of ill omen cannot get far before we are on our heels again. She's running out to sea once more. She would lose sight of us before she turns toward the accursed spot where they would have their rendezvous. Their behavior astounds me. They acted as if they've seen a ghost." "And so did I," Don Audrey declared. "I swear that for an instant I saw Zorro standing at the butt of the bowsprit, and then he was gone." "By the saints, I saw him myself," Sergeant Gonzalez shouted. "He was here to aid us, man or spirit I know not, but he was here, and now he's disappeared." Fray Felipe came toward them. "It cannot be that he is alive and aboard," he told them, "else he would discover himself to us at once. Perhaps it was but a strong hope that caused us to imagine the sight." "Fray, I swore friendship with you, but I'll break that compact if you say such a thing again," Sergeant Gonzalez declared. I saw him. I say, man or spirit I know not, but I saw him." The caballeros were busy helping the crew with the new sails. One by one they were sheeted home, and presently the schooner gathered headway once more. On it sailed, in the wake of pirate craft, Vengeance only delayed. Far behind, Senor Zorro watched her grow smaller and smaller, and the flare of hope that had been in his heart dwindled to a mere spark again. His unexpected plunge into the sea before he had recovered from the first ordeal had unnerved him for a moment. He had come to the surface to find that the schooner had drifted away. Before he could handle himself to an advantage, she was some distance, and the pirate craft was drawing away from the ship of smoke and flame. There was a strong tide running, and Senor Zorro was too weak to fight against it. Near him there drifted a spar that had been torn away when the ships crashed together. He struggled through the swirling water and managed to reach it, and drew himself upon it to sprawl where there, almost breathless and gasped. He was exhausted. He was too weak to signal his friends, and doubted whether they would see him to do so. Shouting would be a waste of breath, he knew, and so stretched across the spar he fought to keep consciousness, closing his eyes and forcing himself to breathe normally. When some strength had returned to him, he sat upright and looked across the sea. The pirate craft was in the distance. The schooner, the fires extinguished, some of her sails in place, was drawing away from him rapidly. Senor Zorro gave thanks for that. His friends were not deserting the senorita. He began to take stock of his predicament. Far away he could see a dirty streak on the horizon, and knew it for the land he would have to reach. He was in sore condition for that hazardous journey. His wrists were raw from bleeding. His leg pained him. He scarcely could see because of the glare of the sun and the water. Thirst tortured him. Hunger added to the torture. Senor Zorro sat up on the spar and smiled a sorry smile. He made sure that his blade still remained at his side. "Sword of Zorro, we are in a sorry state," he declared. "This is an emergency such as never have we faced before. But we must win through." A moment he hesitated, and then, as though it gave him courage to himself, and raised his voice again, this time in his song. "Atención, a caballero's near." But his voice broke, and he told himself that he was a fool to attempting to sing out here in the wild waste of the waters, clinging to a spar. Far better to concern himself about getting to land. Senor Zorro rested a short time longer, watching the disappearing ships, and turning, he looked at the distant land. "Sword of Zorro, we travel to the east," he announced. If ever I touch dry land again, there I remain for some time to come. This seafaring is sorry business." But he said that merely to amuse himself, of course. He would fare forth to sea again at any time to rescue the Señorita Lolita, and well he knew it. He hoped only that Don Audrey Ruiz and the others would be of service to her. He adjusted himself as well as he could and started to swim, clinging to the spar that rendered his progress slow, but he dare not cast it aside, for he knew that he would never reach the distant land. For a time he swam, and then he floated on the spar and rested, and he urged himself to swim again. On and on through the hours, while the sun traveled across the heavens, he forced the spar through the water. It seemed to him he was nearing the land, but he could not be sure. There might be a treacherous current in these waters against which he was expending all of his strength in vain, but he did not stop. His mind was a maelstrom. His muscles acted mechanically. Now and then pain shot up his legs and along his back, and often he swam for minutes at a time with his eyes closed. He watched the sun begin its descent toward the sea, and yet he swam. At times song rang through his brains, and other times he caught himself mouthing meaningless phrases. And then he thought of the Señorita Lolita, and he swam on. Twilight came. The sun disappeared. There was a period of darkness, and then the surface of the sea was touched with the glory of the moon. Señor Zorro could not see the land now, but he knew in which direction it lay, and he swam on a few minutes at a time. And thus passed the night, but before the dark space and just before the dawn, Señor Zorro was laughing raucously out of his wits. Some god of good fortune kept him swimming in the proper direction, and when the sun appeared again, it brought new agony to his eyes, new tortures of thirst. He swallowed salt water and spat it out, and found that it made him ill. For a time he was stretched across the spar, weak, sick, and on the verge of delirium. He fancied that a myriad of pirate vessels were about him, bearing down on him. He saw the pretty laughing face of the Señorita Lolita in the mist that hung above the sea. He laughed back at her, and once again his cracked voice rose in song. "Atención, a caballero's near." He felt himself grow suddenly weak. It seemed to him that the land was near at last, but he could not be sure. He drew himself upon the spar, sprawling across it. He must rest, Señor Zorro gasped. In that gasp he passed into unconsciousness. Back to earth he struggled as though a land of hideous dreams. He tossed and groaned and tried to open his eyes, but he felt he could not. There seemed to be a roaring in his ears that was not of the sea, and finally it came to him that it was a human voice attempting to beat through his unconsciousness and bring him to the understanding of things. "Señor, señor," the voice said. Señor Zorro struggled yet again, groaned once more, and opened his eyes, but not into the burning glare of the open sea. He was in cool shade, he found, and from a distance came the hissing of the surf. He blinked his eyes rapidly and felt something at his lips. He drank deeply of pure, cold water. "Señor," there was the voice again. "For the love of saints, señor, come back to life." Full consciousness returned to him in a breath, and he opened his eyes wider and struggled to sit up. Then he saw that he was in some sort of poor hut, that a native was beside him with an arm beneath his shoulders. "Ha!" Señor Zorro gasped. "Thank the saints, señor," the native cried. Señor Zorro, with the help of the native, sat up. He had been stretched out on some sort of couch, he found. He glanced around the interior of the poor hut through the open door at the sparkling sea. What, he began. "I found you yesterday, señor, far out to sea, riding on a piece of wreckage," the native said. "You had lost your wits. You fought me when I tried to take you into my boat and tried to draw a blade against me. Then you went unconscious, and I had my way." And then, señor?" Zorro gasped. "Why, señor, I fetched you here," the native explained, "and throughout the night you raved, and so far today the sun has but 2 more hours to live." More water," Zorro commanded. The native gave it to him. He drank deeply, stood up, and walked to the door and looked out. There was no other habitation as far as the eye could see. "Where is this?" Zorro asked. "On the coast, senor, far to the south of Reina de los Angeles. I am but a poor neophyte who eats what fish he can catch. I worked on the hacienda, senor, but the governor took all of our taxes." "I know," Senor Zorro told him. "And so I got me a boat and came down the coast and built this poor house, and here I live alone, and I'm happy. There are times when I carry fish to the stronghold of the pirates and trade them for some other things." "Ha!" Zorro cried. "The stronghold of the pirates? Where is that?" "Less than 10 miles down the coast, senor, in a little bay. There are huts and women and children, and every now and then a pirate ship puts in after a raid. They're safe there, senor, though they are within 8 miles of the presidio of San Diego Alcala." "By the saints," Zorro swore, "and how does it come that you did not rob me of my sword and the few things of value upon me, and toss me back into the sea?" The native looked at him frankly. "Pardon, senor," he said, "but I never would do such a thing as that. For I knew you instantly, senor. You are Senor Zorro, who rode up and down the El Camino Real and avenged the wrongs of the natives and frailes. You once punished a soldier who beat my father. If it is necessary, senor, I'm ready to die that you may live." "And now?" "Now," the native interrupted, "it would be best for the senor to sit and rest while I prepare some hot food. Then whatever he commands shall be done." "There is a pirate ship in the offing and another," Zorro insinuated. "Si, senor, the pirate ship ran from the other going out to sea, but a short time ago I saw her pass going toward the bay, and the pirates have their headquarters, and the other ship passed but a short time ago, pursuing." "By the saints," Zorro cried, "I would go to this pirate's den of which you speak, and as speedily as possible. The senor must first eat, so that you'll have strength," the native said firmly. "Then I will guide the senor to the spot. It is 10 miles, and the senor is a weak man." "I will eat the food gladly," Zorro replied. "You prepare it as speedily as possible. There shall be ample reward." "It is reward enough that I have been able to save the senor's life," the native answered. "The friends of Senor Zorro do not forget what he did for them."